Apparently she needs no introduction, but it is a pleasure to officially welcome Nicole, not only as the guest speaker for a session that she has been attending loyally for many, many months. So she's a familiar face to many of you. But she's also going to be taking the baton from Chelsea and joining me as a co-chair. And I'm really thrilled about that. I just wanted to mention that Nicole is in a unique position, I think, academically, because she teaches at Hostess Community College, where she's in the French and Francophone Studies program, and now at the Graduate Center, where she is in the Film Studies program. So she runs the gamut of community college students and graduate students. So she's a real teacher and a unique scholar doing primary research in Algeria. Her first book I know about was The Francophone-Algerian War Through a 21st Century Lens, that was published in 2020 by Bloomsbury. Then she co-edited a book on migrants, and I'm sure she's got a lot of more publications in her. But today she's going to be focusing on three, to me, little known Algerian documentary films that I found absolutely fascinating. I'm so glad she's unearthed them. And she's going to introduce a concept that I'm fascinated by, the rhizome as a way of looking at them. So take it away.
All right. So since we're relaxed among friends here, I'm going to be a little bit relaxed too in my presentation style. And I thought that I would talk sort of about before I get to these specific films that this chapter discusses. And this is a chapter from a book. So I want to sort of give you a background at how I came to these conclusions and what influenced me. And then I think that the chapter and its theories will be a little bit clearer. So as it was published in 2020, and books are really, really difficult and long and take quite a while. I should say that I spent 5 years writing it. And I had a lot of prior knowledge about this subject because of my dissertation. So I'm going to sort of show you how that happened. So in 2005, I was living in Lyon, and I was like part of a program where I taught English at a high school and got to live in Lyon for a year. And it was that year I saw the film Caché by Michael Haneke. I see Chelsea knows it. A great, great film. And there was this mention of a massacre in the film, the October 17th, 1961 massacre. And I had not been aware of this. And so when I realized that there had been a massacre I hadn't known about and that was hidden, hence the title Caché. There are all these reverberations of the Algerian Revolution, or what I call the Franco-Algerian War, that were coming up in French culture, and then as that happened through documentary film and then film. And yeah. So that was the thing that alerted me. At the same time, actually, as I saw the movie, there was a couvre-feu, a curfew, because there had been riots all through the outskirts of the cities and the banlieue concerning racism, concerning policing in these areas. And so that was also interesting too, that the October 17th massacre took place because people were protesting a curfew. They were protesting a curfew, and I'm watching it while there's a curfew going on. So these kinds of what can we say, jumps in time, skips in time were taking place. And I had the extreme chance for me to get to study under Marnia Lazreg at the Graduate Center. And she had just finished this book, Torture, Twilight of Empire, which talks a lot about torture and in the Algerian Revolution, and Marnia's also Algerian, but it talks also about American torture as well. And this was really fundamental for me, this book, and it affected my writing, but also just the class with her, because it taught me so much about theory and how it could be incorporated into a historical analysis. The book Empire came out. Derrida is so important to me, Deleuze and Guattari, so that was part of it. And this Benjamin Stora book was also, I mean, remains pretty huge, but it was especially at that moment because he was talking about the Franco-Algerian War in France as a repressed memory. And to be able to use this kind of psychoanalytic vocabulary to be talking about a nation was something new to me. And I thought it was great. And Raphael Branche, this book says 2016. I can't know. I don't know. It was her dissertation research that she discovered how all these hidden files that were finally opened up that demonstrated how torture during this war was basically an official policy that was just covered up. So this kind of cover up thing was really, really interesting to me, the idea of a repressed memory and finding films that were all coming out around the same time that were looking at something that had happened 40 years ago. And that's what drove my dissertation project. But I never was working on Algerian film. It was always the French perspective. And it started to, I was thinking about, I wanted to show these things about trauma culture in film studies. Ian Kaplan's book also was extraordinary for me. Maureen Thuram's Flashbacks in Film, that I think I mentioned in this chapter, because looking at the genesis of the word flashback, looking at how this is related to war and war trauma, and how the flashback device can represent that, as I was finding throughout my study. Marianne Hirsch's, she has 2 books about this, about post-memory, and how generations afterwards will feel the trauma of their parents when it has been this atrocious. And I was seeing that also in these films that were made in the 21st century. So I was really lucky again, and I got to I was selected to participate in National Endowment of the Humanities Summer Institutes, and I hope that they happen again. And I highly recommend this because it was just some of the best scholarly experiences ever, exchanged with, I don't know, 20 other professors, all in different situations about a subject matter. And these were in Oregon, and about Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, post-independence. So I had the occasion to meet and study with Reda Ben Smaia, and his book, Experimental Nations. It gave me, I felt empowered by his lectures and by his writing to really use this the French theory that I had to talk about Algeria. And he also works a lot with Deleuze and Guattari and Derrida. And Radana Khanna's book, Algeria Cuts, also what continues to, I still am quoting from it and using it in my last presentation. Guy Austin's book, Algerian National Cinema, came out in 2010, and I can't say enough great things about this book and his writing style, and it also really informed me. So also at the Institute, these are very bad screenshots, but I was exposed to the films of Mirzak Alouache, an Algerian filmmaker. And I absolutely love his films. I know that Matthew, if he's still here, presented on one of his films and has written about one of his earlier films. And so Alouache, though, for me also represented this problem, because he isn't living in Algeria, he's living in France. He has to get French funding. He can't, get Algerian funding because he's not making enough of a pro-Algerian statement. But yet he's returning to Algeria always to make films, that is what is interesting to him, or that is what he can market. There's both of those factors. And I have met Alouache in Paris, so that also was great. These experiences then made me decide I could do it. I could write about Algerian film too, and that I needed to, that it was imperative that I do so, that I couldn't exclude Algeria from this conversation. So I just wanted to briefly go over a little bit of history and not assume that everyone is obsessed with Algeria as I am. So the conquest was in 1830. And I put a few other facts that I feel like are really necessary to know, that they took this land that they said wasn't cultivated, that they just decided that it was French. All right, so you have this deterritorialization, taking people out of where they live and confiscating their things really early. And then it's 3 departments of France. So it's not like any other French colonial situation. Algeria is very special because they made it France. It was l'Algérie française. It wasn't anything but that. So I'm just skipping forward to the FLN attacking, had 30 organized attacks, and then all the independence movement parties and their many pretty much get behind the FLN at that point. And that's when you say the war starts. And that's really important for the second film I talk about, China is Far Away, because in that film, the subject really is the schoolhouse where a French instructor taught that was killed by the FLN on that day in 1954. And so the filmmaker really puts that into question and why that happened. But more interesting to me, actually, is how children understand history and what he's showing their relationship to the Algerian Revolution is. I guess I put that the French discover oil fields and began oil production because I just want to show that Algeria has always been, for the French, about making money, and they're making money with oil. They don't want to let go of that oil money, you see. So you see another reason why this war lasts so long, and also with the atomic bomb testing that Charles de Gaulle always had in mind, and was so important to him to have this area to test the bombs, which is a whole nother subject that's been very covered up. And then 1962, there's the Evian Accords, and it's a peace agreement, though it's hard to just put a mark on the end of a war. There were still attacks after that. So my fascination then with Algeria and film and transnational film is that it's an authoritarian state. So it censors and promotes this official history, right? But in spite of the state's wealth, there's an impoverished population. They cannot very easily get any kind of a film education. So then they're having to go back to France, the former colonizer, to get educated, and then return to Algeria to make the films. But yet then there's not money to support the film. So you see this really interesting situation. And then super fascinated by the audience and the film public, because once you do get a film made, how does it ever reach an Algerian audience? This is really complicated, and it's less complicated, I think, now with the internet. and my presentation on Papisha at SCMS, I talk about that. But it's still problematic, right? Because there's not very many movie theaters. The prevalence of American media, it's difficult to find the Algerian public, especially because who is the #1 consumer of North African film? France. So you could say there's many reasons for that. You could say there's an Orientalist fascination, that the filmmakers are going to France to be educated. It's very complicated. You can also say there's a lot of Algerians in France that maybe want to see movies there. So it's a complicated thing. And that France finances and aids many countries' film industries. I should have put an apostrophe there, sorry. Fonds Sud, Cinéma et Aide au Cinéma du Monde are two government associations that do that, and so it's active. But I mean, there's also like television. Arte is huge and finances a lot. Then and I've already said the exchange. So this is the reason why for me, Algeria is a very specific transnational problem, but that I think embodies something that we see often with. It's so difficult to use these terms because I see all the problems in using them, but global North, global South exchanges and transnational partnerships. So then on top of that, before I get to the rhythm, if you want to actually depict the war between the two countries, it's even more intense, right? All of the problems that I just sort of briefly outlined with the film viewing public, with the financing, with the depiction, with trying to get the Algerian government's okay and worrying about censorship, all of those things are even more intensified because this was a debated war that was then repressed in France. And then as Gania has told me, my expert here, teaching, and as I'll show you in this conflict, teaching the Algerian Revolution in Algeria, it's like the Quran, it's like the Quran. It's so important and overshadows everything, and it's an official history. The infighting is, the many problems are not included in this history, official history. So when I talk about the rhythm, I'm talking about, yes, I put a picture of it up, Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari's term that they use in Mille Plateaux. And I'm interested in this because, as I was saying, when I'm talking about post-trauma, when I'm talking about these exchanges between France and Algeria that are not exactly clear, it all comes to mind when I think of the rhizome. I said rhizome, I guess it's rhizome. The opposite of a tree that grows in time and space. This time natural reality is what aborts the principal root, but the root's unity subsists, as past is yet to come as possible. So that there is this kind of relationship between the past and the present, where they're both influencing each other. They both relate to each other, and that there's a multiplicity of connections. That's very important. That the order is not clear, but that there are many different connections. And so there's many different ways to enter into a conversation about the Algerian Revolution on film. There's many ways to exit that conversation coming from the present tense, and they're weaving in and out. And that's how I understood these three documentaries. So let's see. So the first film I was going to talk about is called Algérie Tour Détour. And the film is the best effort to make an anti-colonial film and to adopt the Algerian Revolution. And they're working with René Vauthier, who is such an important filmmaker. He made the first anti-colonial film, Afrique 50, in the Ivory Coast, was put in prison for that. So became enemy of the state in that moment. But then I don't think I talk about it in this chapter, but I did in the first chapter of my book. He was also imprisoned by the FLN, who said that he was maybe possibly working with Russia on something, and he wasn't, but he was in prison for a few years for that. So he'd been on prison in both sides. And he was so important and made these films with the FLN, for the FLN, that were shown at the United Nations, really worked for Algerian independence. I mentioned that he was the first screenwriter of the Battle of Algiers. But he always said that he was doing this on the foundational, like, French belief in equality, right? So it's complicated, and I should mention that my friend Matthew Crooms is going to have a great chapter about René Vautier in his upcoming book. And he had he worked with these two filmmakers, Ariane Brun-Moschetti and Laila Marouche, and he has all their footage and everything. And so that'll probably be included. And I did exchange with them, and they were really, really kind to me. So I included these pictures because I thought that for me, that was, I guess in today's film vocabulary, maybe we would call this a quotation almost. That I felt these reverberations of the Battle of Algiers when I was watching René Vautier walk around the Kasbah. And I want to show you the trailer for the film. Also, do I need to share the screen again? Are you seeing everything I'm seeing?
Yeah, if you just shared the PowerPoint, Nicole, it won't let us switch over.
Right.
So
that's what I was
share
thinking.
that
Okay.
window. Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to stop the share, and then I'm going to share again. All right, here we go. And it's only in French, so I'll tell you what's going on.
Il y avait 400 salles dans ce pays.
So
Aujourd'hui, on n'a aucune.
this man's talking about how nobody's going to film. The population is 45% below 25.
Sont pas plus idiots aussi, sont pas plus cons. En plus, ils attendent là. C'est des millions de jeunes.
And what did they have to do?
Je me demande ce que font les jeunes dans ce pays. Mon Dieu, vraiment, je me demande.
À 19h30 à la salle polyvalente, on passe un film avec un débat après.
So she's announcing there's a debate afterwards. They're trying to get women to go to these films, but.
Merci. Mahama. Comment ça se dit? L'air du pays.
L'air, c'est rire. Rire تاع البلاد.
And that's Vautier
Ça sent.
from the airport. These are the Super 8 films I talk about, also as adding a real artistic flourish. It also brings you back in time.
Il y a 40 ans, René et son équipe sillonnaient l'Algérie avec un cinébus. C'était le temps des cinépop. Septembre 2004.
So 40 years ago, he was using these buses to go around Algeria and show films to the public, and they're now going to do that again. These are talking about Algerian politics. But you see again how the filmmakers are young women, but the public is almost entirely men, and then debates.
Dis-le, c'est quoi mon discours? Un discours. C'est gratuit.
He's handing out flyers, telling them it's free. So So that was the trailer for that movie. The next movie I was going to talk about is, let me share my screen again. La Chine est encore loin, or Algeria is still far away. So this film, I actually did get to meet the filmmaker, and I was am a fan of his work. So he's made quite a few films about Algeria. So I was aware of him, and so it was a little bit different for me. It wasn't a first-time filmmaker. He's been doing this for quite a while and continues to make films. And again, you have this transnational situation, if you will. He lives in Paris with, his wife is from Senegal. They live in Paris, but he is only making films about Algeria. And going to Algeria, and that so I don't know. I don't think that I put that he was living in France in the book, because I know that I didn't feel like he wanted that to. Again, we're amongst friends, but I don't think that he wants that to necessarily be known. And the ENTV that did fund, in part, this film and signed on for it, then when they saw the results, pulled their funding. And this is what I've seen happen more often than not when I've talked to directors, that they have funding for a moment and then they don't, or it never comes through, or it's simply not going to be seen. So I mean, the idea that he almost got there with this one, since with all of the other ones they're made for French television or Arte, or released in France and not in Algeria, that was special to me, that he came close. And as I said, this was a teacher that was shot at this school, and on November 1st, 1954, and it was symbolic at the beginning of the revolution, and it was planned. So I wanted to talk specifically about the children's drawings of the war, and how they also brought me back to this film, I Am 8 Years Old, which is about 10 minutes, I believe. And devastating. If you haven't seen it and want to, it's on YouTube, and cry a lot. These are children that I believe were in Frantz Fanon's care, and they had drawing therapy. They had escaped to Tunisia and were drawing what had happened to them or their families, or what they witnessed, and then they're explaining in French what occurred in the film. While you look at the images, you don't see the children talking. So I felt that this was especially resonant in the film. La Chine est encore loin, China is still far away, when he shows the children drawing how they imagine the revolution. So I will show you that. Stop this share and then go back to. Looks like maybe, oh, here it is. Okay, yeah. Sorry. I'm gonna fast forward. No. For some reason, the sound is a little bit off if I go forward, so I'm just gonna play the whole 2 minutes. And I'll tell you what is going on in French, I mean in English. So this is by the schoolhouse. Do you know in what year they constructed this school? The school? Who constructed it? Oh, the French. I'm sorry, there's something really strange going on with the sound and the images. and I don't know what it is. I'm going to try one last time. They killed them all. They killed them? All right. I don't know what happened. That didn't work, but you saw the children drawing. And there is a discussion in the film that's quite interesting, and I'm sorry that that didn't work out, where the teacher, like, for example, they show a French man killing, a child's drawing a French man killing an Algerian with a sword, and the teacher's like, a sword and not a gun? And the students are very confused. They're making up what they think the revolution might have looked like, but they obviously do not know. And so that's what he's pointing out, and that's why the film then lost its Algerian funding, because the children were not proving to be knowledgeable about the revolution in that scene. So I guess the last film I was going to talk about, Fidai, was made by Damien Honoré, and I had really great exchanges with him by email. And that's actually, I should add that that's how I got to see his film, because it played at a festival and I couldn't see it at the festival, and then I contacted him somehow by email, and he sent it to me. And so he made this film with his great uncle. This is maybe not to the extent as some other documentaries, but basically it's a reenactment. He's taking his great uncle through what he did for the FLN, including shootings and going to a prison in France where he was imprisoned and talking about being tortured there. So it's very, very difficult for his great uncle by the end, but he's still very determined to say that he did the right thing, that he believes in what he did, and how he helped Algerian independence. And I talk also about Derrida here, and our archive fever, because it's a really interesting relationship with history when you're mining these old documentaries and trying desperately to teach people about what colonialism was. And so I feel that that's what he is trying to do with this film, is to expose the present to the atrocity of colonialism and the trauma that it has had on his uncle. And so I also show a quote, if you will, from this documentary that Honoré explained to me he felt was necessary, because words couldn't explain how awful this war was, that he needed actual footage. And I can also show you, before concluding, show you the trailer to that. See if I can figure this out one last time with the screen share. Sorry, not that.
قالوا لي ما لا عندنا قضية أخرى نخدموها. قلت له هي ما كانش مشكل، أنا حاضر. قال لي ما لا هذا لازم نحطوه. ما نخاف حتى من واحد، الا من ربي سبحانه، الشيء اللي ربي كاتبه لك هو يجي. واش يعني نخاف من واحد من عبدي عبد كيما انا ما نخافش منه.
ساعات اخرين يضل يكركب في نسوين بصح، ومن بعد يروحوا يعملوا فينا واش يحبوا، ومن بعد يروحوا ومن بعد دخل اخر خلاص يولوا يحطونا ما ينولي كان بالقش يلحقوا يعني.
يقول لك هاوي بالتريسيتي يحطوا لهم تريسيتي في وذنيهم،
And this is where people were
يشربوا
tortured.
لهم الماء بالصابون ويضربوهم. لا اللي ما عنده هو الواحد يضحي بحياته، سواء عنده ذراري ولا ما عندوش، سواء عنده ذراري ولا ما عندوش، يضحي بحياته عشان الاستقلال. انا كي شاركت في الثوره ما حطيتش روحي نقعد حي الزمان، في 24 ساعه راني ميت. رجعت لي الذاكره كلها، رجعت كنت ناسي شويه ودركا رجعت.
اسمي خديجة، زوجتي هذه.
اسمي عبد الرزاق، لقمة بن عدودة، ابن الثالث لمحمد الهادي.
فخورين بيك.
اسمي ولاد، جدي الهادي.
اسمي الهادي، لقبتي بن عدودة محمد الهادي. رحتش نصر باش يعني نحشي، انا رحت نعاون الثوره باش كما قال الاخر تستقل الجزائر. يمشي نهار ويشوفوا وش عمل.
Guest is a very funny comedian.
Sorry.
We know from his work on Saturday Night Live, which is this Saturday at 11:30 on
sorry,
NBC.
guys.
And Peacock with
Trying
host
to
Willem
turn off the
Dafoe and
sound.
musical guest Katy Perry. Please welcome to the show, James Austin Johnson, everyone.
I don't know where that sound is coming from. Help me out.
You must have a video running somewhere in the background. Look behind the screen, maybe.
All right. Finally, thank you so much. In conclusion, I was just going to say, these documentaries derive from a struggle against the colonial paradigm that cannot be wholly redacted from the process. And that's what I came up with. I think these are the best efforts. And I really, really admire these filmmakers and their courage. But I think that still we can find these traces of the mission civilisatrice, especially in Algérie, tour de tour, in the kind of problematic way that René Vautier is. And I think that these are the best efforts, and it's not dissolved, as I say. These films reach across time and space to complicate a binary that is yet to be dissolved, that colonial history, that revolution is still weighing in on the depictions today. Thank you.
I think you can stop sharing the screen.
Oh, yes, indeed, I want to. Enough of that. So I hope I explained. I know I talked quite a bit. It was definitely. I was thinking, William, about how you were writing on comedy, and I was thinking about how I had to do different projects during this that were lighter, and I did some on comedies because this was definitely very, very difficult to write about and very depressing at times, trauma and torture, etc. But
Nicole, I read your piece several times, and I was really amazed by how you juggled so many details. I mean, there's a lot of subtlety in your argument and a lot of information that we're not familiar with. And what you did today, just summarizing everything is really made it all clear. Created a scaffolding that we can climb around now, I think, for the next few, time that we're together. Really great job of it. And thanks so much for showing us the video clips. They make a lot of difference to actually see it.
Yeah, and these films weren't easy to find even when it was closer to the release date, but basically impossible to find now. And especially as I've lost my copies. But I never actually had I never had a DVD of the last film. He shared that with me through a Vimeo site. But I do think that documentary is such an interesting form, especially these experimental forms. And when you think about trying to get Algerian state funding when you're going to make a documentary, and how difficult that would be, because they can't see the script in advance, because they also have to see the scripts. They have to go through, all these boards in Algeria. So that also, I think, was an interesting part of the puzzle for me.
One of the many rhizome connections that you talk about is linguistic. And I was interested in the DVD covers. I noticed that in Fidai, the Arabic matches the title.
Yes.
In La Chine est encore, in Algérie Tour des Tours, there was a mismatch, which my Arabic is not good enough to understand. The first word, maybe Ghania can help with. Jula in Algeria. What is Jula?
Oh wait, you're on mute, Ghania.
You're on mute.
Sorry. First of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm very glad to be here. Jola means un tour. So tour in français means a hangout around the area.
Okay.
For example, I would say, I'm gonna pay a visit to a town. So I'm gonna visit the town.
A tour.
This is what we call Jola.
So the French plays on the word. There's a play in the French title that's not in the original, or I guess it's the original in the Algerian title.
Well, Algérie Tour de Tour, I mean, I think it's very much the filmmakers are French, and they're with a French filmmaker. And so I think, I actually think, as the theory-minded person I am, and my correspondence with the directors, I think that it was influenced by the detour in French theory, detour. So I think that they're doing something specifically French with that, and I think that that's great that they translated it, but I'm not sure. I don't know if the translation, Ghania, you can tell us if you think it holds.
I think this is my opinion. I would say he is using the words as a play between brackets, because when you say détour, it means that, let's say, to explain the word itself, okay, and then we're going to put it into context. So détour, it means you were going to do something and then you backed up, right? So tour and détour is kind of a metaphor there. I don't know exactly what he means by that, but tour means you go and visit something, right? Explore something.
Mhm.
And then détour is kind of you change your mind or you want to hide something. I don't know what he means by that exactly.
You
But,
skirt around the issue. But Nicole added, wittingly or not, another play on words with retour,
Mhm.
right? Which also
retour.
is appropriate. I don't know if you noticed this, Nicole, but in your PowerPoint, you wrote tour, retour. That was brilliant.
I did that.
And then La Chine est encore loin doesn't have an Arabic title at all on the DVD.
Okay, if I can say something about La Chine est encore loin, there is in Quran, for example, in Quran, for example, you know, there is a text where it says you need to learn to read and write, even if the knowledge is far in China, because at that time China is very far. You know, they didn't have any tools to go beside animals, right? They need to walk or use camels, or that's all they had. So to go to China is a very long trip. So this is kind of the reference to say it's very far. And this is known in the Arabic word when you say, oh, you go and get something even if it's in China. And maybe he's using this to say that, to refer to how far it is.
Yes, he talks about that. I think I mentioned that in the article. But what interests me too, that he also talks about in the article how it was c'est drôle. It's witty, comical if you translate it into French. So that there was always this understanding of it being for a French public. Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah, let other people weigh in. Matt, I know, has a real interest in the subject. I don't know if Matt's
there,
but
are there any? Hi, Matt.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for the talk.
All right.
I was actually really interested in this connection between Jia Zhanggan and the Algerian filmmaker. That was really interesting. I'd never heard of that. I didn't know he was teaching. Where was that at? Was he teaching at the Sorbonne, or I forget? You mentioned it in your chapter.
I'm sorry, what?
The Sorbonne connection with the Chinese filmmaker.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I wasn't sure if you were interested.
Not the Sorbonne, but the University of Paris.
Okay.
So whatever, whichever. I think it was Paris 8. I think, like University of Paris, though. Yeah.
I wasn't sure if you were interested in Jia Zhanggan's films, and I'm glad you showed that trailer, because like when I was reading your chapter, I was thinking, I was like, wow, I wonder, like, does the Algerian filmmaker then like learn from Jia's particular style, which is like sort of very specific? And it kind of it didn't necessarily, the trailer didn't necessarily look like a Jia Zhanggan film. And I was wondering if you could say more about that connection, if there is anything that you noticed from like watching the film that sort of connects these things transnationally, because it's a really interesting transnational connection.
I do not know anything about, I've seen like 1 or 2 of his films, but I don't know anything more than that to connect them. So I regrettably cannot respond further, but thank you for drawing my attention to that.
Well, thank you for drawing my attention to that.
Oh, I don't know. I mean,
Matt,
I think
you also mentioned that Jia Zhanggan was one of the producers of Fidai.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, and that he has that relationship with Unori, sort of as a mentor. But I will say that, I mean, that just goes to show how important film is in France, and how much money is in film education, that they can have a renowned Chinese filmmaker teaching in their university system. But I guess, I mean, the same could be said in the United States, right? That people, I mean, maybe he taught there for 2 or 3 years, and that was some sort of agreement with some kind of financing. I'm not sure.
But isn't it also part of the rhizome connections that are, you know, they spread out underground and they kind of pop up in unexpected ways? That's a great metaphor to explore.
Thank you. It's true. Thank you for calling my attention to that.
Is there a Russian connection too, do you think? Well, I was reading, I don't know if you saw the New York Times had an article today about France losing ground in Africa among the colonies, in places like Senegal and Mali and Ouagadougou. And in Ouagadougou, I don't know if you followed it in January, they took the French flag, cut it up and sewed it back together so that the colors were arranged like they are in the Russian flag.
Wow. No, I didn't know about that. I want to know more.
So, and you mentioned one of these films uses the ciné-pop concept, which was pioneered, of course, in Soviet Russia, right? These trains that went around to villages showing propaganda films and making them. And one of the people in the film was doing that in a truck, right?
Right. So René Vautier, that was what you know, the film Algérie Tour de Tour, and a lot of writing about René Vautier before he died in, I don't remember what year, 2015, was very much in propping up him as an anti-colonial filmmaker and being, you know, really, really admiring of all that he did. And that was one thing that he did do, is he claims that he stole this truck from the French military and stole a projector, and then went around and showing films and called them ciné-pop. But then I've talked to other Algerians that said that actually that's not really what ciné-pop was, that there was also a ciné-pop in theaters. But in any case, this was a way that they were showing Algerian films and showing pro-revolution, anti-colonial films across Algeria in the early years after the revolution. So I did not know, when I was writing and I started discovering more, I discovered, yes, that actually a very, very similar, pretty much the same thing was happening with France, that they had trucks and that they were showing people in villages films, but they would be more about like how France is great and how you need to wash your hands, and very much the civilizing mission kind of thing with the truck. And then I did discover at some point that yes, that this was actually Soviet. I'm thinking, and other scholars I've talked to have talked about the same, something similar taking place in Morocco. So this is not unique, and I think that more research needs to be done on it. I can think of that would be a really interesting article for somebody to do. Would be to really, really get at the genesis of this phenomenon of driving around and making prop-up theaters to a propaganda. So thank you for reminding me of that.
Yeah, it's such a rich field to explore. I'm going to give other people a chance. Navid, are you sitting on some thoughts?
Yeah, so I was thinking more about the part that when you were talking about rhizome and this and breaking away from like this you didn't mention it directly, but you somehow implied breaking away from this chronological time, and
Yes.
that's when time and space are they're not as chronological as we see in Western world. And I was thinking of if it is related or to the way that time is perceived in, sorry, I get all these messages, that the way that time is perceived before the colonial world enters the Muslim world, and that is not necessarily chronological. For example, the whole term inshallah means that everything depends on the will of the God. So that we assume that the coexisting of the past and present and the future, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not familiar with Algerian cinema, but I was thinking if there are other examples that move away from chronological order, or if this move is in any way related to this pre-colonial perception of time that is rooted in like Islam. And
I feel that I would be essentialist if I made some kind of statement like that. I mean, I've certainly seen, I mean, it's also really complicated when you talk about film, right? Because if you are talking about France having such an important role at the beginning of film, you could argue that it is a Western form, it is a French form, or they would say that, like the seventh art, right? So I think that's complicated to talk about. I mean, I still when I watch something that is not going to have chronological order, I'm still going to think of it as experimental rather than non-Western. I wouldn't. So that's my in summary my response. But I do think that these filmmakers are also informed by a French education and a French perspective as well, and that their individuality almost relies on breaking apart such easily seen notions of time and space. And also, again, I keep going back to the text I think that influenced me at the beginning, and post-trauma, and having a national post-trauma, having that to deal with, and how trauma can make time and space, can alter them significantly and can mix the past and present. If that answered your question.
yes, it does. Yes, it does. But because I'm also interested about this, how time was like perceived before the modernization in my own research on Iranian cinema. So that's why, and I'm trying to think it in regard to Deleuze and like colonial thought. So that's why I saw all these links in your work, and it made me think about,
Navid, tell us a little more about what you're looking at, your work.
So I'm working on Iranian cinema, and I want to have a kind of new periodization of Iranian cinema, and instead of focusing on Islamic Revolution of 1979 as a pivotal moment, instead of that, move back and talk about how modernity, modernization, or modernism that was implemented in the country created a new kind of modern cinema, which ironically connects more to the tradition than modern. And I'm talking about like aesthetics of it. And that's about how Deleuze uses time and how time was perceived in Iran before modernity.
Are you using Cinema 1 and Cinema 2? Are those the books you're using?
Yeah, so those books are my main focus for now. But yeah, I'm still working on my dissertation. So yeah, let's see how it goes.
Yeah, well, I then recommend checking out the rhizome, because I think that's the most accessible of, and it's also like the first page of Capitalism and Schizophrenia, right? Mille Plateau. And I think that the connections you're making right now sounds very relevant.
And wasn't the presentation last April on the Battle of Algiers all about the way time is mixed? So if, Navid, if you're interested, I thought it was a fascinating look. It might give you some ideas. I think we still have the link available. If you go to our website.
Is it available on the website?
There's a page of the website that has a listing of all the presentations. Like this is the last in the series. And last April, it was on that film. And it specifically brought a theoretical apparatus to look at how time is represented.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting.
Yeah, I think you might find that helpful.
Yeah, and yeah, that's Alan O'Leary's. Also wrote about the Battle of Algiers.
That's the one I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's
Alan
O'Leary.
Leary.
And it he's talking a lot about the Orientalism within the Battle of Algiers and autoethnography, which might also be interesting for you, because Navid, since you're dealing with the same issues I'm dealing with in some respects, right? When you're making a film in your country, but you're making it for a European / festival / art house circuit.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
And my outside reader also is interested in the whole idea of colonialism and post-colonialism. So I guess, yeah, this would be more helpful to have a new look.
Yeah, or it might be.
I want to pick up that thread of colonialism and ask Nicole to highlight what I think is one of her many contributions to this theory of the rhizome, which is that it doesn't work in the end. Right? That the colonial, the intrusion of the French perspective keeps going back to, I think you call it an arboreal metaphor.
Right. Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
So, and using Deleuze and Guattari, they talk about ants, and ants being, bugs, that they are talking about colonial resonances, and that they're always going to be there, and they're threatening the rhizome, right? They could kill the rhizome, and you have to be aware that they're there. But at the same time, the rhizome is it keeps expanding and keeps growing, and so in that way threatens the ants. So, and I mean, there's different theories that talk about the same thing with different language. But I mean, yes, it's precisely that. It's that you can make a film that is very much anti-colonialism, but you still are going to have to make it with some French money. And then it is going to put the whole thing in question, and for French viewers, that put the whole enterprise into question. And that's why also my conversation with Malek Ben Ismail was so interesting, because he wants so badly to not have that baggage, right? He wants to be an Algerian filmmaker making films about Algeria, but he is ultimately he has to end up depending on France, and he cannot seem to make a film with Algerian funding, because he is going to, just by nature of his belief system, be questioning the official history. So, but even though he's doing that with the best, intentions, there's still, I can't escape this idea that these people are performing for France, and that this is and very few Algerians who see it. That to me doesn't destroy the whole enterprise, I wouldn't say, but that I think it still needs to be acknowledged. And I think that that's the kind of critical post-colonial studies lens that needs to, I mean, I think that there were different moments, like I said, maybe before René Vautier died, where people couldn't be as critical of them or couldn't be as critical of projects because they believe so much in their ideals. But I think now we can acknowledge the great ideals and still say that there are these instances where the idealism or the integrity is at least threatened.
You know, I looked that up. I Googled ants and rhizomes, yeah. Nicole, and apparently there is a delicate balance, because not only do the ants don't threaten the rhizomes, they also feed each other. There's an interdependency, and I think maybe that's more to your point.
Yeah.
They depend on each other. You can't have post-colonial without colonial. You can't have the revolution without, you know, the suppression.
Exactly. I mean, how are you, I talk a lot about that in the introduction of my book. If you are going to talk about the Algerian Revolution, you're in the 21st century, then you're automatically keeping the past and the present. You're not going forward to a certain extent. And in the same way that if you are going to talk about the Algerian Revolution in film, then you automatically are going to have to be using some money from the former empire. I mean, pretty much, I don't see a situation, many situations where that happens. I'm trying to think of films. I mean, there are Algerian state productions, but that are, you know, kind of hagiographic biopics of generals, right, that do not depend on French funding and that are uniquely funded by Algeria. But the kinds of films that my book explores and that I'm more interested in, and now that are being made about the 1990s and the Algerian Civil War, those kinds of films are not going to be funded by the Algerian state.
I have a question maybe for Gania more, because before the French came in, the Arab. So I don't really know the history of Algeria that well, but you could I may be going out of bounds here. Could you say that the Muslim did a kind of colonialization of the whole of North Africa?
Go Gania!
I have to say something before I answer your question. Everything you stated, Nicole, and you, William, you know, this rhizome and the complexity of the relationship between, let's talk about Algeria and France. Part of it is because the history or the fact are not taught. They are not there. The generations, the new generations, they don't know the truth. I'm one of the examples. I was raised in Algeria. I was born in Algeria, I was raised there. I went to college there, and then I went to France. To tell you how complex is the relationship, you know, it's automatically I was thinking about France, and I went there. And then there I learned more fact than when I was in Algeria. So I don't know the history as well. Well, no, a little bit. I learned more things later on in France because it's democracy compared to Algeria, at least, right? I can get any book I want to read. In Algeria, you cannot, at that time, at least a few years ago, because now we have internet, you can access to a lot of material. So there is a complexity between these two countries because of what happened before and what is happening now. Algeria is still dependent on France, and France is also somehow dependent on Algeria because of the gas and the oil, right? For example, when you see what is going on right now with the Ukrainian war, of course, France will face Algeria and go to Algeria to talk about gas. By the way, a couple of days ago, the French exterior ministry went for a couple hours to Algiers to talk about that, because there is that relationship that is complex. I told Nicole the other day, it's like a couple that they fight all the time. Algerians, for example, they have a lot of rights as not citizens, but as when you go as Algerian to France, you have more benefit than if a Tunisian goes there because of Evian, Accord and other things. But to answer to your question, I try to give you just a picture. So basically, the old people in North of Africa, not only in Algeria, are Berber people, Amazigh or Berber people. I am Berber. I speak Berber. I do not write Berber because when I was a kid in Algeria, we didn't have Berber in school. This is just to give you an idea how politics is in Algeria. We should have that language because the old language in the land. So Berber were living there, and then after Islam in the Orient came in, so the Muslim people, they came to Algeria, and they stayed there. So it is a form of colonization, yes, because they want to impose their religion first. This is where they came, by the way, and then their culture, their everything, right? And so the Berber, they were fighting at the beginning, and then with years they stayed there, and they ended up by marrying with Arabic people. Just to give you maybe a sense, up to today, some families in Algeria, they refuse that their kids, their daughters or sons marry Arabic people. Up to today. Now, I cannot tell you that I am 100% Berber, all my, grandpa, I can't guarantee that. No, it's very complex to say that, it's generation and generations. So they came here, so the Muslim people, they came to Algeria, North of Africa in general. And then they stayed there and they never left. And then, France came in and then stayed for 130 years, a little bit more than that, right? And then in 1954, it was the war, and then 62. I don't call it independence because it was not an independence. It was an independence in terms of war, and even after Evian, it was some killing, a lot of killings actually. And after that, Algerian people are not free. Today, they are not free. If you post on, Facebook or any media, you just criticize the president or just a minister without insulting him, you can go to prison. So everything that happened after 1962, right, didn't change anything in terms of freedom, because again, the history is not there. We don't know. We want the politics, they want to hide that. In both sides, France and Algeria. It's worse in Algeria because in France, you can speak up, you can go to libraries, you can get things, you can, exchange. In Algeria, it's very hard. And unfortunately, each time I go back, because I go back, when you talk to people, you feel that, if you try to talk about history, is limited. Generally speaking, of course, not everybody, I cannot. Just as a general set, you speak with anyone, you try to talk about sensitive subjects. The independence war of 54 62 is very sensitive. You cannot criticize FLN, for example. And we know that they are not sent, right?
Mhm.
You can't, it's very hard, it's delicate. Again, because first of all, the school, I will start from like elementary school, right? We do not teach kids for critical thinking. This is one.
Mhm.
And then later on, the books. Of course, there is only one version of the history. And even that version is a little bit modified because, you know, they arrange the politics. I'm sorry to be a little bit dramatic here.
No,
No,
I
I
really
don't know,
appreciate
William,
this.
if I answered your
Oh.
question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh,
Nicole,
Maureen,
you got to be careful when you go here.
I know.
No.
I know.
So I don't want to scare Nicole because she's going there. It just, I am not happy about what's going on there. But, you know, I never wore any hijab to go there.
Mhm.
I speak, I mean, I would not speak politics like loud, but I speak politics. So it's not that, you don't need to be stressed, Nicole.
But you identify yourself as Berber and
Yeah.
French, and I don't know if you are a practicing Muslim, but you have. It seems to me that the colonial the term colonialism needs to be interrogated. Or today, I mean, that's what you're doing, really, Nicole. You're looking at the way in which these interconnections, China, you know, Russia, places, you didn't mention the United States, but they're all part of the identity, right? They're all part of the underground connections that today, the influence and maybe the repression comes in a different form.
I'm seeing Maureen Turham's hand. And since I talked about her book at the beginning of my presentation, and I definitely want to make sure I hear your question.
Please.
Thank you. And congratulations on the work, Nicole. My question was about, it sort of correlates to what we were just talking about, but how do you balance doing the research in the context of a lot of repression from the Algerian government at present towards the film industry?
That's a great question. So, well, I guess the way I did it is I got around it because, in a certain sense, because I was trying to talk to directors that were not working so directly with the government and that were willing to talk about their experiences. There's another film at the end of my book also that was interesting like that, where I exchanged a lot with a filmmaker and she told me specifically about the problems she had with the Algerian government. So I met somebody who works for the government, the Algerian government, Ahmed Benjawi, who also writes always about film. And that was interesting because most film scholarship that mentions him does so in a very positive way, and doesn't really inform you on his involvement with the government and how he's helping make decisions about films, whether they get funding. So what I decided ultimately to do when I had this article in, this was an article in a journal, I included that he had, I think it was this article, I included something that he said, that he had said like, oh, this would not get funding because of, you know, something that he told me personally. But I hesitated when I did the book because I noticed how my other film scholar colleagues were not doing so, and were being more balanced about criticism of the Algerian film industry and the government involvement. But even though I was trying to be more balanced, I think I seem pretty critical here. But I mean, I think that my answer is to try to really focus on the filmmakers that are being courageous and confronting the state. And in general, they're getting fringe funding, and in general, they're willing to talk about it. Thank you.
Well, we usually go till about 1:30 and we're close to that. So this is a chance for anyone who wants to add something before we close up for the day.
Well, I really appreciate being able to talk about my chapter and my book today. It's really great. I feel like it's a I mean, I've talked about this at conferences, but it still felt really great to be exchanging with you, and because I love transnational cinema so much, and the kind of conversation that I think Algerian film creates when you think about the funding and the audience, especially the complexity is so unique. I'm glad to share it.
Well, thanks so much for doing this. And I think you've given us a lot of ideas and a lot of tools that we'll probably be able to apply. Certainly the rhizome and the ants, I'm never going to forget that. That's and I wish you all well with your research, and hope you can join us in the future. We plan on having more of these in the months ahead. And if you think you would like to share, as Nicole has, what you're doing with the rest of us, please send us an email and we'll take a look at the dates.
Oh, and also thanks Gania for coming. I really appreciate it. It added so much to have you with us.
Thank you so
Absolutely.
much for inviting me, and I hope I come again. Invite me again, please.
Great. All right. Have a great day, everyone.